Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, Donald Trump's cabinet is taking shape with Marco Rubio, also known as the Foreign Hawk, expected to be named as Secretary of State. A revived pact between Moscow and Pyongyang sees thousands of North Korean soldiers deployed to the Russian front lines. That's according to reports. And the US President-elect Donald Trump's pledge to pardon January 6th rioters sparks delay requests in their prosecutions. And Donald Trump is briefed by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top aide on plans for Gaza, Lebanon and Iran during the next 2 months. Hello and welcome. We begin in Washington, where the US President-elect Donald Trump has made a new round of appointments. Well, according to US media sources, Marco Rubio, known for his hardline stance on China, is set to be chosen as Secretary of State. Well, that would make him the first Latino to hold that position. Also expected to join Team Trump, Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor, and Stephen Miller, an unapologetic defender of Trump's tough immigration policies. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Clark Judge, a former speechwriter to President Ronald Reagan. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. It looks like the incoming administration is taking shape. Senator Marco Rubio tipped for Secretary of State. Do you think he's the man for the job?
He's a very good pick, and it also indicates all of these are going to indicate priorities. Senator Rubio, Florida, Cuban in background, speaks fluent Spanish. I believe Spanish was his first language. Florida is also a senator of, was a senator during part of his time before being before election to the Senate, was a big source of our fight against drug importation. So this suggests that there'll be a big emphasis on Latin America, and particularly on Mexico and the drug problem in Mexico, and the Secretary of State's role in the border issue as well. He's a good pick for that.
I mean, some call him a China hawk. Do you think Beijing's worried about this appointment?
Everybody who's appointed to the administration will be a China hawk. That's a fair statement.
When it comes to Ukraine, Rubio has said in the past that he's not on Russia's side, but he did say to NBC back in September, unfortunately, the reality of it is that the way the war is going in Ukraine, it's going to end with a negotiated settlement. How worried do you think Ukraine should be about his appointment?
It depends on how the negotiated the settlement is. I don't think his appointment in any way signals a difference from what Mr. Trump has already said about Ukraine. Want to get it ended, wanted to get it ended in a way that's decent for the Ukrainian people, and but do want to get it ended, and not in a way that advances Russia.
Before I talk about anybody else in the new lineup, I just want to stay with Rubio for a little bit longer, because he's made some pretty personal attacks on Donald Trump in the past. I'll tell you a couple of the things he said about him. He's called him a con artist. He once said he was the most vulgar person ever to aspire to the presidency, and he said he's not going to make America great again. He's going to make America orange. I mean, it sounds like he's really patched things up with Donald Trump. And knowing what you do of Donald Trump, is he someone who overlooks personal attacks like that and sort of puts them to one side?
It depends on the context, but I suspect if you went and looked for what Mr. Trump has said about Senator Rubio, you'd find it just as bad. They both, particularly in 2016, both slung things at one another. It is very much, I'm told, in his business dealings before he entered politics, Mr. Trump was in an environment in New York, particularly in his construction business, where the various parties were very harsh on one another and what they said about one another, but afterwards went out and got a beer together. So it's I think Mr. Rubio's like that too. They're both adults, and they know that after it's over, the contests are over. In that case, presidency in 2016, that they had common interests and common views, and so I don't put any stock in that as an ongoing issue.
Let's talk about some of the fairly notable absentees, at least for the time being, on the list of Trump appointees. Not seeing Nikki Haley's name anywhere. Neither am I seeing the former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Do you think we're likely to see them in an eventual lineup?
Well, Mr. Trump has said that they will not be in his cabinet, and even in his administration, I believe. But he certainly said not in his cabinet. They were both harsh and late to the game in terms of lining up. So, we'll see. But I would say that at least for the first year, you won't see them.
Okay, let's look at the UN ambassador appointee, Elise Stefanik. She doesn't have an awful lot of foreign policy experience, does she? And I'm just wondering what you make of that particular appointment.
Well, she's a harsh critic of Iran. She has been very much outspoken in terms of the Iranian policy and her dislike of the way the last administration handled it, the Biden administration handled it. She is the first in her, just a personal note, she's the first in her family to go to college, and she graduated with honors from Harvard. She had positions in the George W. Bush administration, sort of early positions, but still substantial. She's extremely bright, extremely articulate, extremely determined. She made a big mark for herself earlier this year when or late last year, but I think it was early this year, when three college presidents were called before her committee in Congress to explain the anti-Semitic outbreaks on their campuses and why they'd been so passive about them. The result of that, she was the leader in the criticism and the questioning, the most effective of those. And the result of it was that all three presidents ended up losing their jobs. It probably improved the reputation of those schools, Harvard, Columbia, and Penn, University of Pennsylvania, but they were, they were reprehensible, and she brought them to task and got high marks in lots of places for that.
Yeah, and that probably explains, doesn't it, the enthusiastic sounds we're hearing from Israel with regards to her appointment.
She is a strong supporter of Israel and a fearless critic of anti-Semitism.
Okay, so obviously Israel enthusiastic about the shape that this national security team is taking. Iran, right to be worried?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The President Trump will be as aggressive and maybe even more so as Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is also the thing that came up in the campaign quite a bit was Mr. Trump's understanding, which apparently eluded Mr. Biden and his team, of the link between finance and the ability of Iran to be aggressive. One reason for all the embargoes during the Trump years was, maybe even the main reason, was to deny them ability to finance events such as they did with October 6th of 23, which they apparently have almost certainly heavily financed and were involved in planning. That probably wouldn't have happened, that event, if Mr. Trump had still been president. For one thing, they wouldn't have had the resources to launch a war and finance it through their surrogates, Hamas and Hezbollah. So yes, she is the entire Trump administration, I feel confident you can say, will be very, very strong about Israel and about Iran and in favor of Israel and putting Iran in a box.
Just taking a step back, and when we look broadly at what we know with regards to the appointees for the second Trump administration, we've got Tom Homan as the country's border czar. We've talked about Elise Stefanik as the UN ambassador. Susie Wiles, White House chief of staff. What sort of a pattern are you seeing here with regards to the profiles of the appointees?
This is a get things done set of appointments and administration. These are all people who do not shrink from controversy and do focus hard on their jobs and getting things done with none of the fantasy play that we saw in the prior administration that made for so much weakness and such bad results. With the border czar, he has a reputation, not only a reputation, but a history of being hard, tough on the border, on crossings, and on Susie Wiles gets things done. She ran one of the best campaigns I've ever seen. I saw it from a distance, but ever seen for the presidency, as opposed to the Harris one, which is now emerging as one of the worst run campaigns for the presidency ever, maybe the worst in modern times. So you go to Mr. Rubio, same thing. His Homeland Security advisor, I'm looking down there, Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota. She has what I would say is an over-the-top reputation for toughness. She published a book last year, the memoir and whatever, and in it there was reference to a dog that she was very fond of, but was way too aggressive, so she shot it. So she has the ability. She has a strong record in South Dakota, not necessarily a place where you would look to for because of its small population for a cabinet member, but she has turned its economy around. She's very tough, very capable of handling. And one last thing, she's South Dakota is from the upper Midwest. The upper Midwest is one of the areas that's been hit hardest by fentanyl and the fentanyl crisis. This indicates real backbone, both on border security, but also on drug importation.
Okay, so we've got a better idea now of what this second Trump administration is going to look like. It's taking shape still, and some of these appointments are not yet confirmed. But how many of the faces in the first Trump administration are we likely to see? And as an extension of that question, do you think we're likely to see a bit less turnover this time around? Because let's face it, last time there were two secretaries of state. There was Rex Tillerson, there was Mike Pompeo, two secretaries of defense, two attorneys general. I mean, do you think we're going to have a little bit less turnover?
Yes, you can't know because, somebody's wife gets sick or something like that. There are family needs and people end up resigning. And those are real risks, and it's 4 years. But in this administration, last time, it's said that Mr. Trump was as surprised as anybody else that he'd been elected. So they weren't really prepared to take over at that point. So they had some misfires. Mr. Tillerman was one of the early ones. People who weren't quite in line, and this time they have done extensive, I'm not revealing anything because it's widely known, extensive preparations for the new administration. The very fact that he's come up with so much of his cabinet so quickly is a good indication of that. They've been vetting people for months. They've been looking at their policy agendas for months. It is not the policy agenda that Vice President Harris was criticizing, which was done outside. In fact, those outsiders are now not allowed in the administration, period, if they had anyone who had any involvement in that thing. But the real planning has been very careful and very well administered and very well thought through. So I think there's going to be a lot more stability. They're going to hit the ground running the first day. That's our phrase for getting started fast. And I think you're going to see an administration that reflects the seasoning of the president and the time he's had to prepare.
Yeah, so it sounds from what you're saying like they're on schedule and more organized than the incoming administration was back in 2016.
Yeah, frankly, more organized than the Biden administration was, or the Obama administration was, or any of the number. Maybe you'd have to go back to Reagan and the first Bush to have an administration that's as well organized at the outset as this one.
Sure, and we haven't talked about Elon Musk yet. Are you seeing him having a domestic portfolio, a more international portfolio, or no portfolio at all?
My sense is that he will have a roving portfolio. He has things to, and he has the confidence of the president on a lot of levels. He has demonstrably enormous talents, both in innovation, which is in industry, excuse me, and in following through and doing very, very complicated, taking on very, very complicated tasks, whether it's starting a new auto company, a high-tech communications company, taking it over and cleaning it up, or creating an extremely capable space exploration company. This is a man of considerable talents. It would almost be a mistake to put him in one narrow area. He should have ability to reach across a number of frontiers, and his role in getting control of the cost of government and levels of activity in government, I think, is indicative of selecting him for a role that takes him in many places. And those places will have implications both domestic and international, and as well as the budget.
And what about RFK? We haven't talked about him either. I'm just wondering how likely you think he is to get the health portfolio. And on that particular note, something I read by Michael Bloomberg today says, quote, a vaccine skeptic and a peddler of junk science, his theories would put Americans at risk. It doesn't sound like Mr. Bloomberg thinks he'd be the man for the job.
Yeah, you mean those who have lost out in this election have nice things to say about any Trump appointee? What a surprise! That was such a nice thing he said. Yeah, it's been ridiculous from the critics. They go over the top, and I think that this will be. It's not clear yet what position Mr. Kennedy has. What is clear is that he will have a position, and that it will have to do with health and nutrition. That's a big category, and we'll just have to see. He also, I would just say that on the question of vaccines, he has while he was still running, he qualified that quite a bit, and it had to do with specific circumstances. So I think that he's certain to have a position of some importance and sway in the administration. What it will be, we don't know yet, and maybe Mr. Trump knows, but maybe he's still thinking about his options.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Clark Judge, former speechwriter to President Ronald Reagan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Bye.
Now, a newly rekindled alliance between Russia and North Korea is taking shape, this in the context of the war in Ukraine, and it comes with reports that Kim Jong-un has allegedly agreed to send troops there to support Russia in its push to retake the region of Kursk. Well, adding to Ukraine's concerns is the possibility of Donald Trump choosing the, quote, foreign policy hawk Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. Well, Rubio, who has called for reducing US aid to Ukraine, could signal a major shift in America's support, and that's further deepening Ukraine's uncertainty. Well, for more on that, we can cross to Kyiv now and speak to Alina Frolova, who is Deputy Chairperson at the Center for Defense Strategies and Ukraine's former Deputy Minister of Defense. Thank you so much for joining us. Just starting off by talking about the new administration at the White House, is there concerned that support for Ukraine will evaporate under a second Trump presidency?
Well, I don't think that it will evaporate because this is still the American obligations. However, we can speak about the value of the support and volume and speed of supply of that support. And of course, we do understand that the policy will be changed and we follow that. However, I really think that the United States will stay here. But one of the concerns which were spoke by many like American senators, that Europe should take more lead for this support of Ukraine. And I think that this is specifically the point which new administration will insist on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not difficult to imagine Donald Trump saying something to the effect that this is a European problem, it needs a European solution. I mean, were he to leave this to Europe to organize amongst themselves, amongst the 27 EU member states, would that be enough help for Ukraine to survive?
First of all, I don't agree that this is only a European problem. I think that this war influenced very much on the whole scope of geopolitical problems which started to rise up after the Russia invaded Ukraine. And I think that's why the presence of United States and other partners is very important here. Obviously, Europe is not ready yet to cover the 100% of the requirements and requests which Ukraine has now to the supplies of weapons and munition. However, if we take the figures, Europe is quite equal now to United States, but there are some specific weapons and systems which we need from United States, and that can make a trouble if the United States will decide it to act in a different way. However, I do expect that President Trump will try to settle up the conflict in very short period, and here we all are completely sure that Putin won't go for serious negotiations now. That is why I think that in some period, seeing the results of these negotiations between Russia and United States, new administration, probably will come to the same policy which we had before with supplies.
Now, I want to talk about negotiations in just a moment, but I just wanted to ask you a fairly obvious question. But were the United States to withdraw support for Ukraine, how long could Ukraine manage for, do you think? How long would they manage to keep Russia away from taking further territory from your country?
Well, I don't think that Ukraine will collapse afterwards, yes, because we still do have supplies from the Europe, and the Ukrainian industry is rising very radically in numbers and in figures. I think that Ukraine will be able to continue to fight for a long number of years afterwards, but the resultiveness and the level of losses will be absolutely different.
So just going back to that point about negotiations. Okay, so let's imagine a scenario in which it is decided that all parties will sit down at a negotiating table. Do you think it would be advantageous to Ukraine for that process to begin before the 20th of January when Donald Trump takes office or after that? And what do you think the reasons would be for your answer?
Actually, in current situation, we don't see any preferable positions for Ukraine on negotiations now. We don't have this leverage which we can use for pressing Putin, for example, to go to a negotiation table, not just claim his desires and his requirements, but to negotiate. And that is why I think, and the same it looks like from Russian side, because they do want to get more territories to have the better negotiation position, let's say so. But in case if Trump will behave like he promised, that he will ask Putin not to escalate, which Putin already not follows after their conversation, I don't think that Putin will be ready to negotiate. So I don't see any before coming to negotiation, some parties should prevail at the front line to have this argument. But for now on, we don't have it.
Indeed, and it's not likely to happen, is it? Because the winters in Ukraine are extremely harsh. We're approaching the middle of November now. It doesn't look like, looking at past winter months, like the lines on the advantages on the ground are going to change too much for either side between now and the thawing of the spring.
Yeah, we also do not expect that it would be. Yes, we see how Russia is pressing with numbers, like with bodies approach, this dead bodies approach, and it continued to do so, because actually this is the only pressing point which they do have, and they don't want to neglect it. But we don't expect that they will have enough manpower to do so, for example, for next 2 or 3 months. However, we cannot now prognose how the North Korea's numbers will play, because we don't know whether these 10,000 are just like a first troops on the ground and they have agreement on much more, or this is everything we will have. But yes, we don't think that the front line will change drastically for the period before the spring.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the North Korean troops on the ground. Of course, these reports that there are, as you say, a number of them on the ground. We hear some of them are wearing Russian uniforms. I mean, how strong is the evidence? I mean, are you absolutely convinced that they really are on the ground?
Well, it's for us, it's surprised that still the Western countries are asking about the evidences, because first of all, already all the intelligence, including American one, confirmed that there is a presence. We saw a lot of video with all those troops being distributed in Russian uniform, also including in weapons. We have the intelligence data about where they are passing training and interoperability training with Russian troops. And we have a few already killed in action, which were reported. We don't have yet prisoners of war of Korean nationality, but I think that it's quite like a soon, which will appear the first sign. So they obviously there. I mean, that this war is quite transparent from the point of view that you can, with drones, you can see everything, and you can make a very good reconnaissance on the ground, and they are there.
And what's your understanding of why North Korea would have its troops on the ground? What's in it for Pyongyang, do you think?
Obviously, we see some kind of public negotiations. Yes, when they got the money for those people, which are quite substantial for North Korea, they got some support, and they got promise of Russia to be on the ground in case of the conflict in between North Korea and their enemies, as they expect them. But one of the discussion which we have here, this is the big question about the nuclear technologies also. Yes, whether Russia should promise something for this geopolitical alliance, not only potential participation in the war. And so it can be nuclear technologies, or it can be a decision of China. And actually, we do understand that both North Korea and Russia are quite dependent from China. And if China plays the bigger play with those two partners, so it can be just the decision of China to conclude such an agreement.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned China. We've talked about North Korea. Also reports that, well, it is widely reported that Iran has lent a significant amount of assistance, particularly with armaments, to Russia in their war effort. I mean, looking at what's happening in Washington and the incoming Trump administration and some of the people in that administration, it's very unlikely and very hard to imagine that new administration would want to see those countries, Iran, China, North Korea, rewarded for their help to Russia in its hour of need by territory that had belonged to Ukraine being ceded to Russia. I mean, that's a difficult scenario to imagine, isn't it?
Well, I don't know why, but I didn't hear from the potential Trump administration participants now that they see this like a partnership of four. They usually speak about China plus North Korea plus Iran, but no, Russia is mentioned there. Russia is staying somehow separately because before the Biden administration was speaking about this like a evil club as a party of four. So the Trump obviously and his advisors are obviously taking Russia as a separate story. I think that this is a big mistake, and I think that the situation will change soon as they will get deeper.
And just lastly, I mean, looking forwards to where things go to from here, I mean, do you have a sense of inevitability that a negotiated settlement will end up being the way for this conflict to come to an end?
Any conflict ends up with negotiations, but it's not the time now because Ukraine does not accept it.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak to us. Alina Frolova, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, on the 6th of January 2021, hundreds of rioters stormed the US Capitol, resulting in the arrests of more than 1,500 Trump supporters, many of whom were convicted of felonies. But with Trump back in the political spotlight, their fate may soon change, because during his rallies, the president-elect repeatedly vowed to pardon those involved in the insurrection. And that's prompted many of the convicted rioters to call on the courts to delay their hearings. Well, analysts believe that delaying or eliminating their sentences could possibly undermine what has been the largest federal criminal investigation in US history. Well, for more on the fate of the Capitol Hill rioters, I'm joined by Philip Lacovara, who is a former Deputy Solicitor General for the United States and counsel to the Watergate Special Prosecutor during the impeachment hearings of President Richard Nixon. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I just want to start by asking you, I mean, I'm sure you're following this story with great intrigue. How much of a difference do you think it will make to the outcome of the justice for the Capitol riot defendants, if indeed, when Donald Trump gets back to the White House?
Well, President Trump has promised, or at least seems to have promised, that he's going to issue pardons to some, if not all, of the January 6th rioters. And this has been an extremely popular position with his base. He regularly referred to these convicted rioters as the January 6th hostages, and he did talk about promising a pardon to them. And many of the people who are in prison today or serving sentences of confinement have called upon Trump to make good on what was perceived to be his promise to issue pardons for them.
Yeah, he's called them hostages. Other people are calling them political prisoners. I mean, is that the right legal language in your book?
I don't think so. I think the Justice Department and FBI were very selective in going after the principal bad actors on January 6th. There were thousands of people who actually stormed the Capitol, but the government has focused on those who engaged in actual destructive behavior, assaulting police officers. I think that's one of the things that makes viewing these people as political prisoners so unseemly and really unfair to the dozens of police officers who were injured during the melee. And so to think of them as innocent political prisoners is just nonsensical in my view, and a distortion of the whole justice system.
Yeah, I mean, one of the people who's been charged is accused of hitting police officers with a bat, quote, multiple times. And just staying on this issue of law enforcement officers and law enforcement agencies, I wonder how they feel about the idea of pardons and whether you think this could somehow end up backfiring on Donald Trump.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think it will backfire on him because his base does see the events of January 6th as part of the theme that the original 2020 election was stolen and that President Biden was never legitimate president. While normally Republicans like to align themselves with the law and order wing of American society, and that normally appeals to law enforcement officers, including police officers throughout the country, in this unique situation, and this is another example of Donald Trump being unique, there is a sense that the mere fact that police officers were beaten and indeed a couple of them died as a result of these confrontations, that doesn't seem to have enraged the rank and file police throughout the country.
Yeah, surprising, as you say. And there are, of course, about 1,500 cases relating to the 6th of January. And I'm just wondering at what stage they're all at. Are they all at an advanced stage or stages that have resulted in prosecution already? Where are we with all of those cases?
Well, interestingly, the government, the FBI and Justice Department are still pursuing some of the people whom it was more difficult to identify. A number of them have been sentenced to prison and served their sentences. A number are in prison. There are other trials or prosecutions awaiting disposition. And I think just within the last couple of weeks, one of the January 6th rioters was just tracked down and arrested close by here in Florida, where I am. And it made big news in the local paper that almost 4 years after the original event on January 6, 21, the FBI was relentlessly tracking down one of the rioters.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you were saying a bit earlier on about the sort of the reaction we could get. I mean, it sets quite a dangerous precedent, doesn't it? The idea of pardoning people for crimes. And I'm just wondering what you think, what risks are associated with that further on down the line and perhaps in different contexts.
Well, one of the things that had given me and other people who viewed January 6th as a constitutional outrage as well as a political catastrophe was that the principal rioters, the most violent people involved in that effort to prevent the transition of power, were being prosecuted. And I and others thought that would send a valuable signal that in this country we have elections, and when the votes are counted, power is transferred, and it is not a legitimate form of political protest to try to storm the Capitol and prevent Congress from certifying the results of the election. However, the exact opposite point would be demonstrated if President Trump goes forward with his apparent promise to pardon some or all of these people, because what it does is to license further disruptive behavior if people are not satisfied with the certified results of an election. It would send the message that they're entitled to use force, and maybe when their party comes back into power, they will be spared the consequences of their crimes.
What sort of grounds are the legal teams representing those 1,500 people using to justify this request for a postponement of the proceedings for their clients? Tell us about the arguments they're putting forward.
Well, they range all the way from just seeking extra time to prepare their defense, await the inauguration of President Trump. Others say that in light of a Supreme Court decision within the last several months, some of the conduct charged is not actually criminally prosecutable. And that's thrown another monkey wrench into these prosecutions, because one of the typical charges that the government filed against these people was that they were violating a statute that prevents interference with congressional proceedings. And it seemed to most of us that, as a matter of common sense, that's what they were doing when they were trying to prevent Congress from counting the formal electoral votes. The Supreme Court's conservative pro-Trump majority ruled, however, that statute only prohibits interfering with documents, not with forcibly breaking down the doors of Congress to prevent congressional proceedings from taking place. Seemed to me to be an absurd, result-oriented decision, but that's the kind of argument that the remaining January 6th defendants are making, that they haven't been prosecuted under a statute that actually applies to the conduct in which they engaged. So there's clever lawyers for almost 2,000 people can come up with a whole array of arguments to try to stave off the day of judgment.
And do you think there are some cases and some individuals that Donald Trump, no matter what he feels, is going to be really unlikely to be able to pardon owing to the severity of the charges against them?
I think if he's got any sort of wise advice from his senior team, including whoever is selected to be his attorney general, he will draw some distinctions. And I think he can politically preserve the benefits of his campaign promise by deciding to draw some lines and excluding from any executive clemency that he decides to offer those people who were convicted of actually assaulting police officers. I think Trump could make that distinction as a politically salvageable distinction while still maintaining the loyalty of his base. And if I had to hazard a guess, it's hard to guess anything about Donald Trump, I would say that it's more likely that he will carve out a couple of dozen people from any general grant of executive clemency that he decides to issue.
And I'm just wondering, I mean, really for the benefit of our viewers who might not be so familiar with the US legal system and the comings and goings in the White House, but are there any examples you can think of legal cases being delayed in the past due to the fact that there's a new administration coming into the White House?
There have been a couple of white-collar cases back during the Clinton years when there was some attempt by a few defendants to defer at either the prosecution or the commencement of serving a jail sentence until the new administration came in because of the hope of pardons. Generally, though, there has not been a system in the United States of incoming presidents issuing pardons. It's more commonly been outgoing presidents who, as a matter of political gesturing or thanksgiving for political support, who have issued pardons to a narrow group of people on their way out the door, including sometimes to relatives who've been convicted of things like drug offenses or white-collar fraudsters turned out to be politically connected. And generally, after the president has been shown out the door by the electorate or because his term is expiring, that's when pardons are granted. It's very, very rare for an incoming president to issue pardons.
And just lastly, I wanted to ask you to draw some parallels with your own experience, casting your mind back to the 1970s and Watergate. And on that note, you said in a recent article, Watergate showed that the system works. I'm just wondering what the situation we're in now and in this particular context, what does this say about the system?
Well, to be more precise, what I said, and I've said this many times in the last 50 years, the system works only if the right people are in the right positions to make the system work. It's not the American constitutional system is not like a machine that is on autopilot and it works automatically. You have to have people of competence and good faith in the various positions to pull the levers of power. Then the system works. What we are about to see, I think, unfortunately, is a system that will go awry because President Trump, following the experiences of his first term, has now learned how to distort the normal checks and balances in the system. And one of his mechanisms, as he's learned, is his decision to try to cut out a major level of the bureaucracy who tried to preserve a degree of continuity and common sense in government policy, and that frustrated Trump. And so he has vowed to remove a whole level of the professional civil service. He's also learned that his initiatives can be hamstrung by courts who find that what he's doing or wants to do is illegal. And so he learned during his presidency about the importance of appointing favorably inclined judges to the Supreme Court and to the lower federal court. So the system only works to the extent that the people are in place in the system who will apply what I consider to be sensible and legitimate standards. And if the people in place are more loyal to Donald Trump than they are to the Constitution, then the system will work to his advantage, but not to the advantage of the American people.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Philip Lacovara, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
Glad to be with you.
Now, moving to the Middle East, where Israeli attacks on Lebanon have claimed the lives of more than 3,200 people now, even as more residents face evacuation orders. Well, the capital, Beirut, was hit earlier today as Lebanon becomes the latest front in Israel's wars. Well, the Iran-backed group Hezbollah has been severely degraded ever since the pager attacks of September. But even so, the messages from Israel of a potential ceasefire remain mixed. Israel's foreign minister has been speaking of, quote, certain progress in those talks. But the defense minister is promising stronger attacks targeting Hezbollah until, quote, the goals of the war are achieved. Meanwhile, a summit of Arab and Islamic nations in Riyadh has condemned Israel's actions, and those present made calls for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's upcoming presidency and appointments look set to play an even more crucial role in the entire region. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Michel Helou, who is the Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you so much for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. I'd like to start by asking you about the top foreign policy jobs in the Trump administration. Obviously quite reassuring for some of the leaders in Israel, but what about Lebanon's leaders? What do they think?
I mean, it's a key question. Obviously, everyone is talking about that right now. I think there was a major, let's say, rift, or there was some sort of a competition between the more hawkish wing in the Trump administration and the more isolationist wing in the same administration. It seems that the hawks won through the very probable appointment of Marco Rubio as a state secretary. And the other roles as well that have been that we've been seeing, Elise Stepanik, the New York Senate representative, as ambassador to the UN, etc. So, and as well as the NSC main appointments. So most probably it will be a quite hawkish administration. Now we also know that Donald Trump is always in between both. In a sense that he doesn't have a very clear idea of what his foreign policy will be. I think he will really, we'll see probably a lot of variations in that. What I believe and what we believe, I think mostly as Lebanese, is that there is something that could be positive, which is a much, let's say, a stronger position towards what Iran could do in terms of interference in the region. So a strong position in order to limit Iran's influence in Lebanon and other Arab countries. However, the major risk here is that we have people that are quite extreme in their views and people that will most probably not, let's say, not limit Israel at all and not put any pressure on the Israelis in terms of their foreign policy. So this is extremely scary because when you look at the appointments that have been made either by Netanyahu and his war cabinet, including the entry of the settlements minister, a woman at the war cabinet, and the replacement of Yoav Gallant, who was, let's say, the most pragmatic minister. The others are much more ideological. Combined with the new appointments of the Trump administration, I think this might be pretty dangerous for the region in terms of unleashing extremism and instability.
And there's another dimension to all of this as well, because according to Axios, at any rate, the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, has already been holding talks with Donald Trump. Those talks, we understand, happened at Mar-a-Lago on Sunday. I mean, don't Lebanon's leaders need to be doing something to make sure they're part of the conversation, especially at these very early stages?
Look, I mean, you're asking the right question, the one that hurts as well. The issue that we have is that the government is quite absent, and Najib Mikati, unfortunately, remains under the strong influence of Hezbollah as a prime minister. And Abiy Birri, as president of parliament, is also under a strong influence of Hezbollah. And there's no president of the republic. So the reality is that today, as opposed to the last war in 2006, as opposed to the 1996 war with Israel, as opposed to the 80s, we have no government, or a government that is only here as a caretaker government, and we have no president of the republic. So Lebanon is very much weakened, and unless we see leaders that are much more responsible and much braver in their approach, I'm very much afraid that we might be the big losers of everything that might happen in the coming weeks and months. So I call on the Lebanese government first to play its role, Najib Mikati specifically, to start opening direct talks with the Trump administration and pressuring as much as possible. We have a very large lobby, a very large diaspora in the US where we could be much more influential had we been more organized. So let's take advantage of that. Let's do something to preserve our country. And on the other hand, call on Abiy Birri, the president of parliament, to open the parliament right now so that we can elect a president. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to have a figure that really represents our country and negotiates in favor of our interests.
Sure, but Michel, to give credit to your acting prime minister, your caretaker prime minister, Prime Minister Mikati, he was in Riyadh at that summit, joined by the leaders of 57 nations from Arab and Islamic countries. Together, they called on Israel to end its actions in Palestine and Lebanon. I mean, together, don't you think it's fair to say that sent quite a strong message, quite a strong signal to the Trump administration?
It did. And I think that the Arab Islamic Summit that happened in the Riyadh was important. I think that the messages passed were the right ones of the need for justice and stability in that region, and calling both for the respect of sovereignty, but also for the need of a proper, decent political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and to the Palestinian question. We need a state for the Palestinians. Otherwise, we're never going to end this nightmare that we've been going through in the Middle East for more than 75 years. So the message was clear. And I think that the Trump administration will also feel that. And I think that the Saudis and Mohammed bin Salman, specifically the Crown Prince, is not ready to normalize if there is no decent political solution to the conflict. And I think this is the right position to take. So we will need more pressure from the Gulf countries, and specifically from Saudi Arabia, I believe, in order to help us get to a solution in Lebanon and in the Middle East as a whole.
Yeah, but the messages that we're getting are quite mixed, I think it's fair to say. On the one hand, we're hearing from Israel that progress is being made on ceasefire talks. On the other hand, we're hearing that there'll be no ceasefire until, quote, Israel's goals are met. I mean, what's your understanding on where things stand with regards to those efforts to strike a ceasefire deal?
Look, Tom, no one understands what's going on. The reality is that the messages are mixed because there is no clear message apart from the fact that the Israelis will keep on fighting as long as they feel that they can fight and that they can win some ground, gain some ground in Lebanon and destroy more and more Hezbollah. The problem is that they're not just destroying Hezbollah, they're destroying immense parts of our country, of our land, destroying village after village in the south, in the Bekaa Valley, in Beirut, in the mountains, etc. So it's a very dangerous policy. And as long as no one puts boundaries to the Israeli aggression on Lebanon, they will not stop. So this is I think, something pretty scary. And the reality is that there is no clear vision, and the goals evolve day after day, just like it happened in Gaza since October 7. In Lebanon, it started with we want to apply 1701, and then we want to bring back the populations of the north, and then it became we want to erase Hezbollah completely, but we never really know when it's going to stop, and it might never stop. So this is why we need a very clear stance from our government first, pressuring both the Israelis and with very clear asks to Hezbollah and to the Iranians, asking Hezbollah to stop the fighting and to agree to a clear implementation of the international resolutions, including in the end of disarmament, so that the state and the army can really take over. I think this is a very clear position that our government should take. And in parallel, a very strong lobbying through the United States, through France, through the GCC countries and Saudi Arabia, in order to pressure both countries, Israel and Iran, to withdraw and let Lebanon breathe and live, as Ghassan Toueni used to say more than decades ago at the UN, when he would say, "Let my country live, let my people live." And I think that this is what we need to hear. But unfortunately, our government is absent today.
Yeah, and some analysts would say it's not just your government that's absent. There are 70 days left of the Biden administration in Washington. And some analysts are saying that the Biden administration doesn't look like it's got the leverage it needs to get any ceasefire deals, whether it's in Lebanon or in Gaza, before Trump takes office on the 20th of January. I'm just wondering how likely that sounds. 70 more days.
Pretty unlikely, I believe. However, there could be an alignment or an intersection of interest between Biden and Trump on this. And that's why Amos Hochstein is still coming to visit Lebanon to play his role of negotiator with the support of Donald Trump. I believe that in the end, the work that they're doing now, they're carrying out now, could also serve the Trump administration. And both administrations have an interest in stopping the war at some point. So I just hope that the Trump administration and Trump himself will wake up not too late and understand that their interest is really enforcing a ceasefire deal and not having unending wars and destruction in the Middle East for the years to come. And for that, they will need a bit of clarity, moral clarity, and a bit of courage in order to pass this message to the Iranians for sure, but more specifically to the Israelis, to their Israeli allies.
I just want to ask you about Hezbollah more specifically, because it's been about 7 weeks now since Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated. Obviously, they've had numerous setbacks. Several top officials in that group have been killed. What's actually left of Hezbollah now, do you think?
Hezbollah has been drastically weakened. From a military perspective, we're talking about more than 2,000 casualties from many different accounts and different reports, but that seem pretty credible. We're talking, and of which more or less the entire military leadership, the top 3-4 ranks have been completely wiped out. So Hezbollah battalions are now fighting in a very autonomous way, with also limited communications means. I mean, they with the pagers and the walkie-talkie attacks, they've lost several means of communications, and we even wonder how they are communicating in between each other now. There has been an Iranian military leadership that has come in order to replace the former Hezbollah military leaders, but I am not sure that they will be able to fight very long with that sort of structure. We're also talking about several thousands of injured through the pager attacks and the bombardments, the continuous bombardments and fighting. We are talking also about a reduced missile capacity, because we're seeing that the daily launches of missiles and rockets have gone down quite also significantly compared to a couple of months ago. So Hezbollah's capacities are very significantly reduced. On top of that, the funding channels have also been, if not cut off, they've been also put under pressure quite significantly, be it through the Lebanese-Syrian border, the various tunnels, and so the legal and the illegal pathways, but also through the airport. The airport is now being, according to various accounts, controlled by the Lebanese army in coordination with the US. So Hezbollah is clearly weakened. Now, what we need to know also is that they still have the ability to fight. I mean, they have dozens of thousands of fighters, and they're able to fight in their village, to do this guerrilla fight for quite a long time. They can resist. But in the end, there's no way they can win this war. Okay. And this is why I think the real question here is really about what's the end goal for everyone. We can keep fighting for years and years if we want, but nothing will come out of that apart from total destruction. So the only solution, the only exit is a diplomatic exit. And in the end, it will end up with necessarily, I believe, the withdrawal of the Iranians, the fact that Hezbollah becomes a normal political party, and that's what we want from Hezbollah. We don't want Hezbollah to disappear. Hezbollah will not disappear, but Hezbollah will have to radically change and become a normal Lebanese political party and not a transnational militia. And in exchange of that, we have to demand very clearly the withdrawal of the Israelis, and we need to reject any sort of violation of our sovereignty from the Israeli army.
Michel, just lastly, a quick question, and it sort of circles back to what we were talking about at the beginning, US policy in the Middle East. Obviously, the Trump administration is expected to try and expand on the Abraham Accords. And I know it's very difficult to imagine at this particular moment in time, but can you see later on down the line that one of the consequences of this conflict will be an eventual normalization of ties between your country and Israel?
Look, I mean, what's quite striking is that a couple of decades ago, Israel was struggling and was doing everything in order to get peace deals, peace accords with Arab countries. They ended up getting a couple of them, Jordan and Egypt, and they've been bombarding the countries with which they weren't able to get peace. But today, or at least the neighboring countries, today it has shifted completely. Today, many Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia and others, and even Syria, we've been hearing a lot about peace talks between Bashar al-Assad and the Israelis since 2009. Many Arab countries are ready to make peace, or at least to have a stabilization of relationship. And the reality is that it's the Israelis that have become that do not want, that have become allergic to peace. And when we see the way they are behaving with this extreme brutality and violence, it seems that for them, the Abraham Accords, normalization with Saudi Arabia and others have become secondary. And what matters for them as a priority is to finish the job, this extremely brutal job that they've started against the Palestinians, specifically since October 7th, but actually started a while ago, be it the forced displacement in Gaza and the destruction of Gaza, or also the potential annexation plan of the West Bank. What's going to happen with us will really depend on how the Israelis will behave. I think we should come back to the Armistice Accords of 1949, that agreement that allowed us to live 20 years more or less in peace and stability. But if the Israelis keep behaving that way and keep, carrying out those violations of our sovereignty in earth, on land, sea, and air, I don't see how we can reach that sort of agreement. So it really depends on their own maturity and their own willingness to reach stability and a serious ceasefire.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Michel Helou, thank you for speaking to Al Arabiya.
Thank you, Tom.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.